So let's just have a look at it. And again, this is a small knife, so I'll essentially use this, which is sort of an artificial mallet. Now that was a fairly difficult piece of wood to split. Few knots up here, and you can see it was binding fairly hard on the knife. And these purple marks are just the marks I had on the knife, because I wanted to measure the edge in particular intervals during some cutting. Couple of knots here. You can very clearly see the knots coming in through the wood. The ideal placement is to go between the two of them, which is about there. There's a lot of vibration in the handle of this. Hard to describe it, but essentially, if I impact the knife on the tip, I get a really hard kickback right here. If I impact the knife in the middle, I get a really hard kickback right here. This is very uncomfortable to try to do any kind of impact work with, and that's a result of improper balance in the knife. And I'm not talking about balance in regards to weight. In regards to weight, the balance point is about right here, which is perfectly fine. But there's another type of balance, and that has to do with the nodes on the blade. So when you hit a blade in one spot, you want it to have no vibration in the area where you're holding it, obviously. And those points of no vibration are called nodes. And by adjusting the taper of the tang and or increasing the weight at the end, you can move the nodes around in a knife. There was no thought given to that whatsoever on this design. The blade was just ground, and almost very little or any evaluation had to be done on this, because as soon as you try to do any kind of impact work with it, you get vibration all along the blade. It's completely obvious. And all this wood I'm going through now is relatively easy to split wood. The first piece was a bit gnarly, but other than that, a couple of little knots, nothing serious. One of the more difficult things about trying to use this knife for this type of work is the grip just isn't long enough. I'm holding it like this. This is very square down at this end. This is actually a point. This is actually a point. So this point is in my hand. The only way to avoid that is to come right up forward like this, which is fairly awkward just due to the angle. So I'm having to go back like this. And again, the kick back in the handle here is very uncomfortable. Now let's move on to some wood that's more difficult to split. This is wood that's been cut with a knife or an axe, so it's pointed at both ends. It's a bit more difficult because it moves around a bit, and that makes it a bit harder on the knife, because essentially you're not putting the force straight up and down. Knives are extremely strong when you load them in this direction. When you load them sideways, or when they twist into wood like this, it makes life much harder for them. And because this wood is going to move here and it's going to move here, it's a bit more difficult for the knife. Couple large knots down here, one there, same thing here. So I'll run a split line down between the two of them. Okay, this is not a nice piece of wood split. Not there, not there, not there. So ideally we'll try to run a line right between all of these. Looks like that should be doable. We put the knife about right there. Set it in. Slow going because the knots are going to bind the wood together. Move the knife forward a bit. Exactly where we want it, right between everything. This right here is the most comfortable part in terms of vibration. The impact on. The problem is hitting the knife in this area. You got to be fairly precise to avoid damaging the scales. But impacts in this area produce the least vibration in the handle. Impacts towards the tip, a lot of vibration. I'm holding this with a relatively light grip around my thumb, is really not even contacting the handle. And the handle is vibrating that much, it's actually slamming into my thumb in this area. This one was held together by a bunch of knots. Tried to go down between the two of them. Worked well, but the wood was just fairly tight grained. Still grasped onto the knife fairly well. Difficult piece, same reason. Run a split down there. No, actually I think I run a split right down through the center of this knot and that knot, because there's knots on both sides. That's about there. Whoa. Perfect. Broke right through that knot and that through that knot. That doesn't happen all the time. Essentially the crack was wide enough that it popped the knot apart. I didn't have to cut it, because the knot actually popped right out. That's ideal. Couple of big ones there. Ideally run a line straight down through the middle. I've just done a small amount of splitting. Splitting in general is not very difficult on an edge because the wood opens up and the blade doesn't do a lot of cutting. It can be difficult on the blade itself because it does put a fair amount of forces on the knife, but in regards to the actual edge, not a whole lot. And as you can see, the knife has no fine cutting ability left whatsoever. It has no ability to cut light vegetation at all. It'll just simply break off the grass. In comparison, this is an MTech 151, which is obviously a clone of the Trailmaster from Cold Steel, made out of 440A stainless. It's done a similar amount of work, probably a bit more, and it will very easily cut through the grass. Now, of course, it's not like you're actually going to be using this knife to cut through grass. This is just an example of fine cutting ability. You'll see the same difference in performance if you try to use it on ropes, meats, foods, that type of deal. This edge is still extremely sharp, whereas the Bushlore has no fine cutting ability. Yeah, you can still use the chop in the woods, hack in the woods, that type of deal, but you try to do fine cutting with it and you immediately notice the difference.